Josh Hennig and Nick Earnshaw filling in for Mike Gill here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Football at 4, Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, and at Geoff P. Mosher on the Twitter X platform is where you find Geoff Mosher as he joins us right now for a Mosher Monday here on 97.3 ESPN. Hey, Geoff, how you doing today?
I'm good, fellas. How's it going?
Doing pretty good, yeah. So we are now a couple days removed from the first preseason game. Not that we're going to overly read everything into it, but I do think there were a couple of interesting elements to take away, which starting with this, Geoff, let's talk about the defense. They had the first team unit out there. And so, what do you take away from Fangio and the Eagles basically saying we need to get our defensive first team out there more than our offense first team out there?
Well, I think that Vic Fangio has been awesomely candid, right, and honest and forthcoming, which is really cool. We know Eagles fans love that kind of candor from any kind of coach. Unfortunately, that kind of candor is also going to explain to you why things are going wrong.
Right.
Vic's been pretty clear on a few guys on what they've done wrong. But I think he made a whole lot of – I think he encapsulated in his conference what's been going on all camp. It's not just that the starters played, right, but 90-minute practices since day one, more pad practices. There's an entirely new defense out there, and not just new personnel, but entirely new coordinator, entirely new position coaches. And he said, look, go look at the offensive side. You got basically everybody the same there. You got a new offensive coordinator, but that's not nearly as much change as we've had on defense. So he needs to get guys reps, including starters. I mean, the knock or the book or the curiosity about some of the important starters like Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Bryce Huff is how many snaps are these guys going to be able to play in a game, because they're going to be asked to play a lot more than normal. And then when you go to the linebacker, you got a guy like Zach Bond, who's never really played inside linebacker as a main position before. So he's got to learn that job. And then everybody else who's new or young, they're just kind of still figuring out whether it's Quintin Mitchell or Isaiah Rodgers. How are you going to fit, and what is your responsibilities now within a new defense?
I'm glad you brought up Bond, because that's kind of where I wanted to go with you, Geoff, because we've heard a lot of hype about Zach Bond in the practices, right? Even Vic Fangio has been like, this guy is doing this and he's doing that, right? But then in the game, he didn't look as good when the lights came on the brightest. And the guy who did look pretty good was Nakobe Dean on Friday night. And I thought it was interesting because we had former NFL wide receiver Dave Klemick on with us in the last hour, and he talked about how some guys are just different when the lights come on. Some guys are just better in game than they are in practice. So is that potentially what we're looking at here, Geoff, where the Eagles got the balance between Bond looks one way in practice, but another way when the lights come on?
Well, yeah, there's a couple of layers to that answer, right? First, Nakobe, I've never been heard or told that Nakobe Dean's not a good practice player and turns it on when the game comes on. I think it's more that Nakobe Dean's an inside linebacker. He's not an edge rusher. He's not a corner. He's not a safety. He was an inside linebacker for as long as we've known who Nakobe Dean is. Now, he's a very good blitzing one, so he's not an edge rusher, but he's a good pass rushing linebacker, and you got to see a little bit of that against the Ravens. And Zach Bond's still learning the spot, so he was caught out of position a few times. And this is what Adam and I have talked about on Inside the Birds. We're almost 3 weeks into camp now. And while you try not to read too many tea leaves or make too much of things, it's hard to this point to not think that Vic Fangio wants Zach Bond to be a starting inside linebacker. So even though I went into camp saying, listen, I think this is going to be Nakobe Dean and Devin White when all's said and done, because Zach Bond's got a big gap to bridge. He's getting every single first-team rep. So I'm reading into that they really want him to be. But Vic pointed it out. He was out of position a couple of times. And yes, Josh, I think when you're going up against the same offense every single day in practice and you get a feel for what that offense wants to do, it's easier to understand where you're going to want to be, right? But what happens when you're playing against the Ravens in the preseason or against the Packers and, Matt LaFleur's play calling in the season opener? They're drawing a big red circle around him saying, let's throw all the some bunch, some trips. Let's try to get this guy caught and not knowing where he's supposed to be where he's supposed to go, and that would be a genuine concern of mine going into the year if he is going to be a starting linebacker.
Geoff, one guy that everyone's keeping an eye on is Quintin Mitchell, Eagles' first-round pick. And, Vic Fangio's talked about they're trying him in nickel, something he really hasn't done a ton, and he's playing the outside as well. What were some of your takeaways from Friday's game from Quintin Mitchell?
Yeah, physical, confident, looks the part. Really excited to see him develop. I mean, it's been a long time. You're a young man, Nick. You're not wearing the scars of Eagles fans who remember the days of Bobby and Troy and Sheldon and Lito. And then
I was a young cat, Geoff. I was a young cat when they were playing.
I just started covering the team right as those guys were finishing it up, and I had no idea I was in for 20 years of really subpar cornerbacks.
The Nnamdi Asamoahs, the Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie, all those years, Geoff. My teenage years.
They were rough. So, yeah, I think it's going to be really exciting to see him and Cooper DeJean develop, and even for them to have backups that might have an ounce of talent like Keely Ringo, right? And Rick, so we'll see. So my takeaway, Josh and Nick, is that I mentioned this last week on the podcast. I wasn't sure if this was the rationale, but I think Vic did confirm it in his last press conference. They want right now Quintin Mitchell to be the nickel back because that enables them to open up that outside spot for Rodgers, right? If you put Quintin at outside corner opposite Darius Slay, that doesn't get Rodgers on the field because he's not practiced as a nickel back. He, in Indianapolis, he was a nickel corner who played the outside, and then they slid another guy inside, right? So if you're going to play Quintin Mitchell on the outside, then you've got to play like Avonte Maddox or Tyler Hall. Cooper DeJean obviously can't practice there, so they've had to scrap that for now. So, if you want to be more young, more dynamic, more athletic, which was really a big issue with the secondary last year, then your best bet is to have Rodgers on the field. He runs a 4-3, right, and have Quintin Mitchell on the field. And the only way they can do that right now is having Quintin be the nickelback.
Not Nickelback the band, just Nickelback the position.
Well, let's hope he's a lot better than Nickelback the band.
Geoff Mosher joining us here on Football at Forward, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast at Geoff P. Mosher on the Twitter X platform. Geoff, you mentioned Isaiah Rodgers, and I'm very curious about him because when you look at, you mentioned all the years, like when they acquired Ronald Darby, that was like a huge upgrade, right? And Darby was like as above average as you get in the NFL, right? So Isaiah Rodgers, nobody really had an expectation for this guy coming in, but he is really starting to look like the guy who's going to be the starter across from Slay. And I just want to know from you, is that good enough? Is that good enough for an Eagles team that they had a lot of problems last year in the secondary?
Is it good enough? That's a great question. I do feel like this is the quintessential, let's not get too fooled by training camp because, it's training camp thing. I think the big thing to remember is this guy's 5'9". And I'm sure this is exactly why he had to compete for the first week or so with Keely Ringo, who's a taller physical guy, because the danger in a 5'9" corner on the outside matched up against your Justin Jeffersons, your Christian Wastons, your, Drake Londons, right? You're giving up so much size, back shoulder ability, mismatch there. It's great that he can run really fast, but when you go up against these big physical receivers, Mike Evans in the league, that gets neutralized, right? Ringo is bigger and more physical, but he's less fluid. So it looked to me like they were competing one versus the other, and they just figured, let's give Rodgers now, get him ready for the season opener and see how that goes. But last year, Josh Jobe was the sort of the top backup. He was the apple of the eye, and then it went to Eli Ricks, and then it went to Keely Ringo. So how the season starts may not be how it looks in October or November or December, but it does feel like Rodgers is that guy now, and you hope that they can compensate for his lack of height with his other abilities and just be better all around defensively.
Geoff, one last question regarding the secondary, but moving to safety is the most fascinating situation I've seen with James Bradberry. I mean, Vic Fangio in his latest press conference was singing his praises on how he's been able to maneuver over to that position. I mean, what's kind of the feel around that situation and what James Bradberry's been able to do at the safety position?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. He said he's doing a really I think he said a damn good job.
Yeah.
And then they went out and practiced, and Avonte Maddox was the first team safety next to the championships. I was like, oh, all right. Yeah. Look, I mean, I still think it's a long shot. I've laid out the argument that when you have that kind of price tag, you don't make the team as the fourth corner because that's a young developmental special teams position. So I said he's got to be able to, if he's going to make the team and they're going to pay him, he's got to be a starter. So we'll see if he can, if CJ Gardner-Johnson's healthy and Reed Blankenship's healthy, how does he become a starter? Well, right now, CJ Gardner-Johnson is not healthy. And so you're getting James Bradberry looked at. This will be a Howie Roseman decision, I think, more than anything else. Maybe Vic will bang a table, maybe Christian Parker will bang a table, and it might not matter. Because if you can get anything for him by the end of camp, and by the way, if you're trying to trade a guy for like a 6-rounder, you're going to sing his praises, right? You're going to say how good of a job he's doing. So I feel like that is the likeliest outcome for him anyway, but we'll see.
Getting back to linebacker, I want to ask you about Jeremiah Trotter Jr. because we know this is a guy that's been seen following Vic Fangio around at practices, right? Fangio says he's been asking a lot of questions of him and the coaching staff. Well, apparently all those questions are paying off because he looked like he belonged on the field playing a role that he didn't really play in college, Geoff. He was much more of a blitzing linebacker in college. I think he really only had, 2 rushes in the entire preseason game, and one ended up being a sack. But still, he looks like a guy who's turning into at least after one game, a competent-looking linebacker.
So you wonder where's the inflection point? Where's the turning point here, where Vic says, "All right, well, I've got my vision of Zach Baun and Devin White, or Zach Baun and Nakobe Dean, but here I have Jeremiah Trotter, who just has a great natural understanding of how to play this position, of what to do, where to be. How long am I going to live with Zach Baun maybe being out of place 2 or 3 times before I'm really worried that's going to cost me a game?"
Yeah.
And then, then I got to get Jeremiah. I have to, the way things are going, and again, I'm trying not to make too much of camp. I'm using more rationale here. Of all the linebackers they have inside, the ILBs, Adam and I hit this hard today because we like that Vic calls them ILBs. They're not edge rushers. They're not edges. They're not OLBs outside. There's
Geoff,
no confusion here.
Yeah, really quick, for those who haven't been paying attention, Fangio has been very explicit about inside linebackers are not outside linebackers, and outside linebackers are edge rushers, and edge rushers don't belong on the defensive line, and the nickelback position is not the cornerback position. Like, he keeps repeating this again and again, no matter how many times some of the reporters keep asking the wrong verbiage of the questions.
Yeah, he's like one of the last guys that's still assigned. Everybody wants to go positionless football, and he wants to be like, no, we have positions, right?
Over my dead body.
If he was coaching an NBA team, he'd be like, that is my power forward. Right. That is my small forward. That's my shooting guard.
They're not just wings. They're forward. They're my power forward, small forward, everything.
Exactly. But so the question really is, how long is he going to be patient? He's not a patient person, right? He's Vic Fangio. He wants good defense, and he knows this defense stunk on ice last year. He saw the film. He played against when he was with Miami, so he saw it himself. Even though actually the defense was kind of good that day, although Tyreek Hill did drop 2 wide open touchdowns, so
he did.
That kind of masqueraded a little bit of it. But I don't know, when you have a player like Trotter who knows where to be, knows what to do, I think Josh and Nick, what it at least gives them is some optionality. It wouldn't surprise me if you saw. I don't think they have a 3-down linebacker, but it wouldn't surprise me if you saw different. Like, here's my nickel linebacker, my 2 linebackers for when it's 3rd and 4 or under. Here's my nickel group if it's 3rd and 5 or more, and I know they're going to pass. Here's my dime linebacker, or no, here's my dime package, which may not even have a linebacker, an ILB in it. Might be like Quintin Mitchell. So he's got options, but I have a hard time thinking Jeremiah Trotter is not going to find a way onto the field at some point this season, maybe earlier.
Yeah, maybe earlier. Hello, Nick Earnshaw, Josh Hennig filling in for Mike Gill here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Football at Forward, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Geoff Mosher joining us on a Monday edition. I'll flip it over to offense, Jeff, because, I'm starting to get some vibes. The Eagles may seriously be looking at Britton Covey for that slot position. And I'm not saying the guys that go out there and have like 60, 70, 80 catches, but I do remember Cole Beasley having a very nice role for the Cowboys when Kellen Moore was coaching them. And I know that there's probably going to be a decrease in number of targets to the wide receivers not named Brown and Smith because they're going to use number 2 tight end. But just seeing a little bit more of Covey getting opportunity in the slot on Friday has to make me think that they're at least considering it more than the previous offensive coaches.
So of all the slot candidates right now that are healthy, which does not include Paris Campbell, which is a big uh-oh for Paris Campbell, obviously I think Britton Covey has the best short area quickness, best separation ability. I mean, we're comparing that to like Johnny Wilson and Anais Smith, who's dropped passes.
Right.
So right now, Britton Covey looks the part. Kellen Moore had a guy like him in Dallas named Cole Beasley. I think Cole was a little bit bigger, not much, but maybe a little bit bigger, a little bit more natural to the position. But either way, right now you're getting a similar type of player in Britton Covey. I just don't know if on a snap in and snap out basis, if this guy can be your full-time slot playing 60, 65% of the offense. Now, remember, I don't think Cole Beasley even did that because CeeDee Lamb played a lot in the slot under Kellen Moore. But maybe Cole can give you half a game's worth of slot snaps along with his punt return ability, and in certain packages give you the separation that you're looking for on the inside.
Jeff, one guy who stood out to me in the first preseason game was Will Shipley, the Eagles' 4th-round pick. What is the expectation for him heading into the season? I thought he looked good picking up some blocks. Overall, on special teams, he looked decent. What's kind of his outlook heading into Week 1?
Yeah, Nick, I love how you point that out and framed it, too, because, he had the touchdown.
Yeah.
And it's like, who cares? I mean, it was wide open.
It was easy.
Got picked off. I mean, like, you could have caught that and went. It was a nice play call more than any execution.
I appreciate the confidence, Jeff. I appreciate the confidence.
No, I think you could have done. Me, I would have torn up my knees and my ankles. But as you mentioned, he stuck his nose in on a blitz and stoned the blitzer. And I was shocked by it because in camp, he's been getting kind of run over trying to do that. So he either learned his lesson or the Eagles have really good blitzering linebackers, so which maybe they do. But either way, that I thought was a big positive development for him. Now I think this is not like Jeremiah Trotter where I think he can get on the field really early and make a real bit. I mean, he's got Kenneth Gainwell ahead of him at the number 2 spot, and Saquon Barkley, of course, is going to get a lot of workload. But I think that as the season goes on, and Gainwell's had a really good camp. If Gainwell, for whatever reason, either gets hurt or continues to not really give you that explosion that you're looking for from a running back, and Will Shipley can, and he can show you that he's better at blitz pickup, I think there's an opportunity for him to get on the field and make some plays. But, man, when we're talking about a second or third running back on an offense that you're going to name about 10 guys who are probably going to get the ball more than Will Shipley throughout the course of the year. So we might as well get the conversation going now here in August before it becomes moot.
Well, I mean, with that being said, like, we know who the starting running back is here, right? But it's like we also know that this organization is not afraid to give Kenny Gainwell love. Okay, we know how much Nick Sirianni's wearing the Gainwell shirt at the press conferences, right? So, maybe if Will Shipley does enough, maybe the organization could be like, well, we don't need Gainwell to be the only running back who comes in for Saquon Barkley. We don't have DeAndre Swift and Miles Sanders here anymore, so we have a legitimate number 1 running back, but maybe the number 2 doesn't have to be defaulted to to Kenny Gainwell. Maybe there is somebody else. Like they were joking on the Greenlight podcast because they had Lane Johnson and Jordan Mailata this weekend where they were like, yeah, we really miss Boston Scott. We wish you would have gotten more playing time last year. And it's like, these are guys who are on the team who are like, we miss the third running back. We wish he got more playing time. And it's like at some point the Eagles organization has to realize there are other people not named Kenny Gainwell on the team.
Right. So I would agree here, even though I know they like Kenny Gainwell, and he still does a lot of things that are really important that Shipley's not ready yet for. But we know Saquon Barkley has had an injury history, and if we're going to project that Barkley, let's say the Eagles want to get Barkley like 18 carries a game with an additional like 4 or 5 catches, right? Let's say it's 18 carries a game. Let's say Barkley gets hurt. I don't think they go and say, okay, now we give Kenny Gainwell 18 carries a game. I think if Will Shipley is doing what he's supposed to do, it becomes more of a let's get, 12 for Gainwell, 6 for Shipley or something of that nature, because he does have some juice. He's got some nice wiggle. And if he can continue to improve in other areas of the game, they want to get him on the field. And don't forget, he might also be part of the new kick return format.
Geoff, before you get out of here, I have to ask you about kind of the breaking news from today and Hassan Reddick. I mean, this situation has turned upside down in New York. Does it make Howie Roseman look that much better that situation has turned out to be what it's been now, and him asking for another trade out of New York? Like, how did that situation all come about?
Not to me yet, Nick, and I feel like it's low-hanging fruit for everybody to pile on the Jets and say Howie is a czar. I mean, it's fine. I mean, Howie signed Bryce Huff and moved on. I think he will be measured, though, on how Bryce Huff does compared to Hassan Reddick. But I'm in the camp of this. The player, this is like Chris Jones last year. The player has zero leverage. He wants to be traded. Great. Is he willing to hold out at his age for the entire season, incur millions of dollars in losses just so that he can become a free agent next year, a year older, a year less time, and try to recoup that money? The Le'Veon Bell route, not a great strategy. Wasn't great for Le'Veon, not great for players over 30 or approaching or over 30, especially slight of build edge rushers. So my gut tells me, Nick, he's going to show up and play. And if he wants his money, he's going to have to play well. And I wouldn't be surprised. I think the Jets have already said this, that, they're willing to at least give him this is what the Chiefs did. They put incentives in for Chris Jones. You win this, you get a little bit more bump, right? He still wound up losing money because he held out, but he'll show up. I would almost guarantee it. Now, I don't know. I'm not inside his head. Maybe he is willing to go as crazy as Le'Veon Bell did, and we'll see, because it happens every once in a while. But I am more of the mindset he will show up and play for the Jets and be part of a really good defensive front, and that's going to probably help him have a really good year.
Well, it goes back to the whole thing of, and I'm not trying to get into a whole deep philosophical thing, but I think there's this whole disconnect sometimes where, if the market says you're worth X, but you say you're worth Y, then you got to find a middle ground there, or you just got to accept what you can get. Like the whole Brandon Ayuk thing. Only one team wants to give him a huge contract. It was the New England Patriots. He says, well, I don't want to play for New England. So the Patriots are like, well, if you don't want us, we don't want you either. Bug off. And now the reports are he's forced to renegotiate a new deal staying in San Francisco, right? So Hassan Reddick might have to come to the same realization where he's like, look, I got to take what I can get. And, don't worry about all this other stuff, because if the market says you're only worth so much money, well, guess what? You got to take what you can get.
Yes. Leverage is a hell of a thing, Josh. And Hassan doesn't have much of it.
He has none.
And you know what? Even holding out for the entire year and losing all that money, the Jets, it's not like the Jets don't have a good defense if they don't have this.
Correct.
I mean, Jermaine Johnson, they've got Will McDonald entering year 2. They have a good front line.
Quintin Williams is a stud.
Quintin Williams, that's right. Good. They'll be okay. Obviously, he can put them over the top and help them win a Super Bowl, but they're not sitting here saying like, man, if we don't have Hassan Reddick this year, how in the world are we going to put a defense in?
Exactly. At Geoff P. Mosher on the Twitter X platform, Inside the Birds podcast. It dropped a little later this morning. It was 11 a.m. It popped up on my phone, but Of course, keep track of all the stuff with the Inside the Birds podcast, InsideTheBirds.com, Inside the Birds on YouTube, and don't forget the Inside the Birds Patreon coverage for all the extra bonus stuff with Geoff and Adam. And Geoff will be back here again on Wednesday here on the Sports Bash. Geoff, great stuff today.
Thanks, fellas. Good talk. Talk to you on Wednesday.